I wake up in a Massachusetts general trauma unit with a fractured collarbone, a shattered pelvis, and a cocktail of high-grade narcotics burning a metallic trail through my veins. The first sound that cuts through my post-op haze is not the rhythmic, reassuring beep of the vitals monitor. It is my mother's sharp, patrician voice nagging with a floor nurse about the lack of available VIP private suites, followed by a bitter complaint about Boston's downtown parking rates. $45 an hour, she laments, as if my near-fatal accident is primarily a financial inconvenience to her afternoon. While I lay pinned to that sterile mattress by surgical steel and heavy splint, my parents were busy making a transaction. They broke into my Beacon Hill brownstone, bypassed my security, and sold my grandmother's heirloom, an original 1827 John James Audubon hand-colored folio print from the Birds of America. It was the only piece of generational wealth meant exclusively for me. They took the $450,000 from that illicit sale and immediately used it to purchase my older brother a brand new custom-ordered Riva Mao sports yacht. They thought I would be trapped in a hospital bed too long to notice the empty wall. They thought my grandmother was too old, too isolated on her estate in Nantucket to do anything about it. When I finally managed to reach my grandmother from that hospital bed and told her exactly what her son and daughter-in-law had done, she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply took a long, measured breath that sounded like the winter wind sweeping across the Atlantic, picked up her landline, and delivered one cold sentence. "It is time you met my attorney. My name is Audrey Vance. I am 27 years old. This is the story of how my biological parents tried to fund my brother's fragile, inflated ego with my inheritance, and how my grandmother and I stripped them of every single asset, title, and shred of social standing they owned. If you are listening to this, drop a comment and tell me which city you are watching from. But first, let me take you back to the day the world went dark. It is a treacherous, biting Thursday in late November. I am a historical architectural restoration engineer, and I am driving back to Boston after inspecting an 18th century colonial restoration project in the Berkshires. On the winding, narrow curves of the Mohawk Trail, black ice is a statistical certainty this time of year. I remember the headlights of a heavy commercial truck coming the opposite way, taking a sharp turn far too fast. I remember the sickening sway of its rear trailer as it hydroplaned. My SUV hit the concrete guardrail, steel crunched like paper, glass shattered into a million glittering diamonds. Then the universe simply turned off. I wake up 18 hours later. The trauma room smells heavily of iodine institutional bleach and the distinct underlying scent of wealth that my parents always carry with them. Arthur and Victoria Vance walk into the room. They do not rush to my bedside. They do not grab my hand, nor do they ask the attending trauma surgeon about my cognitive vitals. My mother drops her Chanel tote onto the vinyl visitor chair with a heavy sigh. She immediately begins dusting a microscopic speck of lint off her tailored Max Mara wool coat, complaining that the Boston traffic was a nightmare and that the hospital's parking garage is an absolute extortion scheme. My father checks his vintage Rolex. He notes they have a strict 7:30 dinner reservation at the Somerset Club with a group of prospective hedge fund investors, so they cannot stay long. He asks how I am feeling, but the words are delivered like a rehearsed corporate script, completely devoid of any paternal warmth or genuine concern. They stay for exactly 15 minutes. I have a titanium rod holding my pelvic structure together, and my mother is more concerned about the sterile atmosphere ruining her blowout. Before they walk out the heavy wooden door, I use the last ounce of my energy to ask them for a small favor. I tell them I need something comforting from my apartment. When I graduated at the top of my class from Harvard, my grandmother Eleanor gave me that 1827 Audubon print. She had kept it protected in her family's private archives for decades before passing it to me. I keep it stored in a climate-controlled biometric floor safe in my home office. I tell my parents I want the small leather travel portfolio from that safe brought to the hospital. I want the comfort of knowing a piece of my real home is near me. Arthur suddenly stammers, clearing his throat nervously. His jaw tightens and his eyes dart toward the window. Victoria waves her manicured hand dismissively, telling me not to be entirely ridiculous. She claims a bustling hospital ward is no place for a priceless piece of American art history, and that it will undoubtedly get stolen by the nighttime staff. She promises with a hollow smile that they will ensure everything is safe and sound by the time I am discharged. They leave without looking back. My professional intuition flares. As an engineer, I am trained to look for structural anomalies, and I just heard a massive crack in my mother's vocal pitch. I caught the exact second my father's confidence crumbled. My parents have always favored my older brother Charles. They have always viewed my career in historical preservation as glorified construction labor, and they treat my hard-earned Beacon Hill apartment like their personal storage unit. I painfully reach for my iPad on the plastic overbed table. I open the secure surveillance application for my apartment. 6 months ago, after my landlord entered my unit without legal notice, I installed a hidden camera disguised within the smart lighting track on my office bookshelf. It points directly at the floor safe. I pull up the cloud archive. I bypass today's footage. I scrub back to yesterday, then the day before. Nothing. I go back 1 week, then 2 weeks, and there it is. 14 days before my SUV spun out on that icy mountain highway. The high-definition footage is undeniable. Arthur and Victoria walk into my office. My father holds an electronic frequency scanner, a device he clearly used to bypass the biometric backup code I had only given to my mother for absolute emergencies. The safe door clicks open. He reaches in and extracts the heavy leather cylinder containing the Audubon print. My mother nods, approvingly, slips the cylinder into her luxury golf bag, and they walk out. They robbed me 2 weeks ago. My near-fatal accident didn't prompt their secrecy. It just gave them a convenient heaven-sent excuse to delay my questions. My hands are shaking against the hospital sheets, but my mind is crystal clear. I open my contacts and dial Nantucket. The real war has officially begun. The high-definition playback on my iPad screen didn't stutter, and neither did the realization freezing the marrow in my bones. My own flesh and blood had stood in the quiet sanctuary of my Beacon Hill home, under the elegant crown moulding I had painstakingly restored with my own hands, and treated my legacy like a liquid asset. The date stamp in the upper right corner of the video read, November 2nd, exactly 14 days before my vehicle collided with the guardrail on the Mohawk Trail. This wasn't a panicked, desperate reaction to a sudden financial emergency. It was a cold, calculated, premeditated extraction executed while I was out conducting a site survey in the Berkshires. Watching Arthur Vance handle the leather cylinder with such reckless indifference made a hot spike of adrenaline pierce through my narcotic fog. He didn't see a masterpiece of early American natural history or a token of a grandmother's singular affection for her granddaughter. He saw a lifeline for his drowning hedge fund and another trophy for his golden son. Victoria stood by the doorway, her eyes darting toward the hallway like a cheap thief, even though she possessed the emergency keycard to the building's main entrance. When Arthur successfully closed the safe door, he didn't even bother to wipe his fingerprints from the digital keypad. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they never even considered the possibility that the daughter they dismissed as a mere glorified historian would have the foresight to secure her perimeter. My hands trembled so violently against the stiff hospital sheets that I almost dropped the tablet. Every shallow breath I took sent a wave of agony rippling from my fractured collarbone down to the titanium pins holding my pelvic girdle together. But as the physical pain threatened to swallow my consciousness, a fierce, protective clarity took its place. I pressed the save icon, routing the raw, unedited MP4 file into 3 separate encrypted cloud servers and blind copying my personal legal archives. If my parents thought my physical incapacitation had bought them a window of immunity, they had fundamentally miscalculated the resilience of an engineer. I locked the iPad screen, the black glass reflecting a pale, ghostly version of my face, hollowed out by trauma but burning with an icy rage. I forced myself to take deep, measured breaths, inhaling the stale, bleach-heavy air of the MGH trauma wing. I needed to establish the exact chain of custody for that stolen Audubon print before Arthur could move the funds through his offshore accounts. Anchorage might have been a small town where everyone knew everyone, but the old money corridors of Boston were a complex labyrinth of private galleries, discreet auctions, and historical societies where reputation was everything. If Arthur sold a registered family piece of that magnitude, he couldn't just list it on an online auction block. He needed an elite broker who specialized in high-end, off-market estate liquidations. The piece they stole wasn't just a random painting. It was a fully documented hand-colored folio print from John James Audubon's seminal 1827 subscription edition. Only a handful of these intact folios existed in private hands throughout New England, and every single change of ownership was tracked by art historians and insurance underwriters with the precision of a property deed. My grandmother Eleanor had spent decades maintaining its archival provenance, ensuring its preservation against humidity and light damage before legally transferring it to me. By entering my home and removing that registered asset without my explicit written consent, my parents hadn't just breached a familial boundary. They had crossed a definitive, irreversible statutory threshold under Massachusetts general law. I pulled my cell phone from the plastic tray table, my thumb hovering over the speed dial for my grandmother's private residence in Nantucket. Eleanor Vance was 89 years old, physically confined to her historic estate overlooking Nantucket Sound, but her mind remained an unyielding vault of strategic brilliance. She was the true matriarch of the Vance family fortune, the one who held the keys to the multi-million-dollar ancestral trust that kept Arthur's elite lifestyle afloat. For years, she had watched her son emulate a level of financial genius he never actually possessed, quietly bailing out his bad market bets while protecting the core assets for the next generation. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp, aristocratic, and entirely unaffected by the late hour. "Audrey," she said, bypassing any standard pleasantries. "Tell me you are in one piece after that mountain road. I am put back together with metal and prayers gamma." I replied, my voice tight and strained as I fought back the tremor in my chest. "But we have a structural collapse in the family. I just checked my office surveillance archive from 2 weeks ago." The line went completely silent for 5 agonizing seconds. A stillness so profound, I could hear the faint crackle of the coastal long-distance connection. I laid out the facts with clinical precision, describing the frequency scanner, the leather cylinder, and the exact timestamps of Arthur and Victoria's betrayal. I didn't cry, and I didn't indulge in emotional hyperbole. I gave her the data, exactly as I would present a structural defect report to a historical commission. When I finished, Eleanor didn't gasp, and she didn't offer hollow words of maternal comfort. Instead, she let out a long, slow breath that sounded like a shifting tide against the Nantucket docks. "Arthur has always been a desperate man, Audrey," she said, her tone dropping into a register that was as cold and unyielding as New England granite. "I simply did not think he was foolish enough to commit a felony against his own blood to cover his margins. He thinks I am too close to the grave to strip him of his unearned luxury." She paused, and I could hear the distinct sound of her setting down her crystal glass. "Do not say another word to them. I am calling Harrison. It is time my son learns the true cost of grand larceny." The metallic taste of high-grade post-operative pain medication lingered on my tongue, creating a dull, heavy fog behind my eyes. as the morning sun began to filter through the heavy blinds of my MGH room. It was exactly 24 hours after my conversation with my grandmother, and the temporary stillness of the ward was shattered without warning. The heavy, solid wood door to my trauma room didn't swing open with the careful, quiet courtesy of a medical professional. It was pushed wide with a thoughtless, aggressive momentum that belonged entirely to someone who had never spent a single day of his life considering the physical comfort or boundaries of another human being. My older brother, Charles Vance, strode into the room like he was walking onto the trading floor of a boutique investment firm. At 31 years old, Charles was the undisputed golden child of the Vance household, a man whose entire existence was a carefully curated advertisement for unearned privilege. He wore a custom-tailored, double-breasted navy blazer that cost more than my quarterly apartment rent, and he left a suffocating wake of expensive sandalwood cologne and misplaced masculine confidence in the sterile air. His hair was perfectly styled, his teeth blindingly white, and his posture practically radiated the smug satisfaction of a man who believed the world existed solely to cater to his immediate desires. Charles was a professional failure, disguised as a financial prodigy, a serial entrepreneur who had launched 3 different high-yield cryptocurrency venture funds in the last 6 years. Every single one of them had collapsed under the weight of terrible risk management regulatory scrutiny and phantom returns, leaving a trail of angry private investors in their wake. And every single time, Arthur and Victoria had quietly stepped in, dipping into their dwindling personal capital and leveraging their social connections to settle the debts out of court, preserving the myth of Charles's inevitable genius. They viewed his catastrophic financial bankruptcies as the necessary stepping stones of a visionary, while treating my steady, respected career in historical architectural preservation as an eccentric, low-yield hobby. He didn't glance at the rigid brace, immobilizing my left shoulder. Nor did he look at the complex traction setup, keeping my shattered pelvis perfectly aligned. Charles walked straight past the foot of my bed, completely ignoring the untouched container of lukewarm hospital broth, and slammed a heavy, embossed leather document portfolio onto my plastic tray table with a sharp, dramatic clatter. The front of the portfolio bore a very specific gold leaf crest, featuring an elegant, stylized anchor and the word Riva. Charles beamed, standing at the edge of my bed with his hands planted firmly on his hips. His chest puffed out as he waited for an applause that he must have assumed was his birthright. "Just finalized the transport paperwork at the Boston Yacht Haven this morning," he announced, his voice booming through the small room. A custom Riva Mara 38 feet of pure Italian craftsmanship. Matte mahogany finish upgraded twin 400 horsepower engines and a custom ice blue hull that had to be approved directly by the shipyard in Sarnico. He sighed dramatically, running a hand through his hair as if he had just survived a major military campaign. "You wouldn't believe the customs headaches getting it cleared through the port of Boston. I've been on the phone with maritime brokers for 3 straight days." I stared at the gold crest on the portfolio. My mind instantly calculated the absolute absurdity of the purchase. A Riva Mare is an open-cockpit, ultra-luxury sports speedboat designed for the calm, sun-drenched waters of the French Riviera or Lake Como. It is perhaps the most wildly impractical, ostentatious watercraft a person could possibly own in the volatile, freezing maritime environment of New England. Its pristine wooden hull and low clearance were entirely unsuited for the brutal, chop-heavy waters of Boston Harbor, or the sudden, blinding squalls that roll in from the North Atlantic during the winter months. It was a vehicle built exclusively for vanity. A $450,000 prop, meant to be docked conspicuously outside the Eastern Yacht Club in Marblehead to project an illusion of immense wealth, not an actual seafaring vessel. "How exactly did you finance an international luxury import, Charles?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, deadpan, and completely devoid of any emotional inflection, to hide the sharp edge of accusation slicing through my thoughts. Charles laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound that echoed uncomfortably against the white hospital walls. Dad's fund closed a massive short-term institutional position on a tech stock last week, he bragged, adjusting his gold cufflinks with an air of supreme self-satisfaction. A total windfall. Parents wanted to reward me for my new automated digital asset platform before the Q4 Investor Summit. They know a real player needs the right presence in the harbour. I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze locking onto his as I asked the only question that mattered. And what exactly was the final price tag for this little reward? He smiled, showing those flawless bleached teeth. 450,000 cold hard cash, not a single cent leveraged. The number hung in the sterile, chemical-scented air of the trauma ward, like a physical blow heavier and sharper than the impact of the commercial truck that had crushed my vehicle on the mountain pass. $450,000. It was the exact certified replacement value listed on the document inside the thick cream folder Harrison and my grandmother had signed during the Christie's appraisal process. My parents hadn't just stolen a piece of art. They had liquidated my entire financial future and my grandmother's personal legacy to buy their favorite son a fragile summer toy that would likely suffer hull damage before the first spring thaw. A wave of suffocating, blinding fury surged through my chest, but I forced my eyes to droop, sinking deeper into the thin mattress as I weaponized my injuries, pretending the morphine was making me too nauseous to continue the conversation. Charles looked visibly irritated that his grand theatrical presentation that had been cut short by my inconvenient medical trauma, grabbing his leather portfolio and exiting the room with a hollow reminder to heal up quick so I could see the mahogany deck in person. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the sudden ringing silence of the room, ready to call Harrison Vance and dismantle my family's empire block by block. The click of the heavy wooden door, signaling Charles's departure, left a ringing silence in room 412. But inside my chest, the cold engine of calculation was roaring to life. The nausea I had feigned to expel my brother vanished, replaced by the rigid, hyper-focused adrenaline that typically sustained me through 18-hour structural assessments of historic timber frames. I didn't care about the throbbing ache in my pelvic pins or the sharp, hot pulls across my left clavicle anymore. Being a restoration engineer meant my entire professional life was built on a single, unshakable axiom. Materials do not lie, and timelines do not bend to human vanity. I painfully dragged the laptop bag from the bottom shelf of the bedside rolling table, using my uninjured right arm to hoist the heavy aluminum machine onto my lap. Every movement felt like dragging a rusted chain across raw nerves, but I braced my jaw against the plastic edge of my tray table and booted the system. Digging through private transactions in the insular, old-money art world of Boston required more than a basic internet search. It required an understanding of how high-end boutique galleries operated their public relations to drive social media engagement among New York and New England elites. I opened a secure browser extension routing my IP address through a private network and navigated directly to the digital archive of Lowell Galleries on Newbury Street. High-end art brokers in Back Bay maintained an ultra-exclusive password-protected portal for preferred institutional buyers. But they also kept a highly public, curated recent acquisitions and placements index to flaunt their market liquidity to prospective sellers. I initiated an advanced query within their public domain, filtering the results using 3 very specific parameters. Category: 19th century American naturalist prints. Artist: John James Audubon. Status: private placement. The screen blinked once the high-resolution interface refreshing to reveal a hidden digital footprint that populated the display in a matter of seconds. There it was, displayed beneath a glossy promotional header, celebrating the gallery's autumn acquisition cycle. A pristine, hand-colored folio print of the birds of America. 1827 subscription edition. Plate number matching my family heirloom exactly. The listing was watermarked with a bold crimson stamp that read, "Sold via private registry," boasting about a swift, seamless, single-payment transaction that had bypassed the traditional winter auction schedule entirely. I zoomed in on the digital invoice summary provided on the promotional tracking page, my eyes scanning the timestamp of the processing verification metadata. Then I pulled up my iPad, placing the security footage from my Beacon Hill apartment side by side with the gallery's public transaction ledger. The dates and times didn't merely align, they formed an airtight, indisputable financial timeline of a premeditated corporate liquidation. Arthur and Victoria Vance had crossed my threshold at exactly 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, November 2nd. The wire transfer confirmation for $450,000 from Lowell Galleries was stamped as cleared at exactly 2:45 p.m. that identical Tuesday afternoon. They hadn't even waited for the sun to set before fencing my inheritance. They had driven straight from the underground garage of my brownstone to the brick-paved alleyways of Newbury Street, carrying my grandmother's legacy in a golf bag like a piece of common contraband. They had weighed the historical value of Eleanor's gift against the immediate, mounting debts of Charles's failed digital asset fund, and they had erased my legal rights without a single second of hesitation. It was a flawless, rapid transaction executed under the delusional assumption that my physical distance on a Western Massachusetts construction site would buy them months of silence. I closed the laptop screen, the sudden blackness of the monitor reflecting the sharp, unyielding lines of my jawline in the sterile hospital light. The quiet in room 412 was no longer the quiet of a victim recovering from a near-fatal mountain highway collision. It was the quiet of an architect reviewing the blueprint of an impending demolition. My suspicion was no longer a matter of daughterly resentment or grainy video clips stored on an encrypted home server. I now possessed a documented, verifiable financial trajectory that linked the theft of my property directly to the cash purchase of Charles's luxury Italian watercraft. I packed the laptop back into its protective canvas sleeve, my breath coming in slow, rhythmic patterns as I reached for the nurse's call button to sign my own AMA against medical advice discharge paperwork. I didn't need their synthetic morphine, and I certainly didn't need to spend another night listening to the distant drone of traffic on Cambridge Street. The foundations of my parents' financial house were built on sand greed and stolen paper, and it was time to ride into the heart of the financial district to hand the sledgehammer to Harrison Vance. The biting, salt-heavy winter wind off Boston Harbor hit my face like a physical slap the moment my private medical transport van pulled up to the curb of One International Place. The afternoon sky over the financial district was a dull, bruised purple, casting long, stark shadows across the cold glass towers that defined the city's economic powerhouse. I maneuvered my body out of the heated leather interior with deliberate, agonizing care, my rigid pelvic brace creaking beneath my long wool coat, while my left arm remained pinned against my chest by a heavy canvas orthopedic sling. Every step on the salted concrete courtyard sent a rhythmic, dull ache straight up my spinal column, but the physical discomfort was secondary to the absolute, icy focus dominating my thoughts. I took the high-speed elevator directly to the top floor, watching the digital floor indicator ascend with a quiet, pneumatic hum until the doors slid open to reveal a private reception area. The brass placard, embedded in the polished mahogany wall, read Vance Harrison and Associates Estate Law and Asset Protection, a firm known throughout New England as the premier legal fortress for old money dynasties. There was no waiting room delay, no administrative screening. A senior paralegal immediately guided my wheelchair through a set of frosted glass double doors and into a sprawling corner office overlooking the grey, churning waters of the Atlantic. Harrison Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched a massive container ship navigate the narrow shipping lanes of the outer harbour. At 58 years old, My Uncle Harrison looked like the living embodiment of the Vance lineage before my father Arthur corrupted his portion of it, immaculately tailored in a charcoal Savile Row three-piece suit with silver hair and eyes that possessed the chilling, analytical depth of an executioner. He didn't offer any hollow saccharine sympathies about my fractured bones or the accident on the Mohawk Trail. He simply turned, gestured toward a leather wingback chair opposite his massive desk, and stated that my grandmother had already altered his schedule for the rest of the month. "Sit down, Audrey," Harrison said, his tone low, resonant, and entirely devoid of the corporate theatre my father favoured. "Your grandmother Eleanor called me from Nantucket before your transport even cleared the Sumner Tunnel. She wants this handled with zero diplomatic compromise." I lowered my body into the leather chair, adjusting the strap of my orthopedic sling as I pulled a secure flash drive from my coat pocket and slid it across the green leather desk blotter. "The video file from the Beacon Hill safe is on there, Uncle Harrison," I said, my voice steady, despite the physical exhaustion pulling at my eyelids. "Along with the public inventory transaction metadata from Lowell Galleries and the registration papers for Charles's new Riva speedboat. The numbers match to the single dollar." Harrison picked up the drive, turning it over in his manicured fingers before inserting it into his terminal with practiced efficiency. He didn't look at the screen immediately. Instead, he opened a heavy combination-locked drawer beneath his desk and extracted a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope that bore my grandmother's distinctive, elegant cursive script across the front. He broke the seal with a silver letter opener, sliding out a single heavy vellum document that featured Eleanor's unmistakable signature right next to a prominent raised Massachusetts notary seal, dated exactly 7 years ago. "Arthur believes he is operating within the traditional boundaries of family grey areas," Harrison explained, his eyes locking onto mine with an icy intensity. "He thinks because he is the managing partner of the primary Vance family fund, he retains a discretionary right of disposal over heirloom property, but he forgets that his mother Eleanor has anticipated his financial incompetence since the day he took over the firm." He turned the vellum document around, pointing directly to the bold, stark header at the top of the page, "Irrevocable Deed of Gift and Transfer of Absolute Title." I read the legal text, my eyes tracking the precise, unassailable language drafted by Harrison himself nearly a decade prior. The document explicitly detailed the permanent, unconditional transfer of the 1827 John James Audubon print serial registration folio 44A from Eleanor Vance to Audrey Vance as an independent personal asset. Under Massachusetts property law, the moment that velvet-lined portfolio was delivered to me on my 21st birthday, my parents' legal right of inheritance or management over that asset dropped to absolute zero. "By entering your residence without written authorization, utilizing an electronic bypass device, and exchanging a titled asset for cash," Harrison stated, leaning back in his chair and pressing his fingertips together. Arthur and Victoria did not commit a family misunderstanding. They crossed the statutory threshold for Class B, felony grand larceny forgery of an asset title, and transnational wire fraud. The silence in the top-floor office was profound, broken only by the distant muted whistle of the harbour wind against the reinforced glass windows. I looked at the deed of gift, the physical manifestation of my grandmother's protection, and felt a cold smile touch the corners of my lips. "Then we call the Suffolk County District Attorney right now," I said, reaching toward my phone. "We have the video, the wire transfer, and the asset title. We can have state troopers waiting at their Beacon Hill townhouse before the markets close tomorrow morning." Harrison raised a single commanding hand, stopping my movement instantly as a dark, calculating glint appeared in his eyes. "Calling the police on a Friday afternoon is the predictable move, Audrey," he said, his voice dropping into a register that made him sound like a general plotting a flanking maneuver. "It is the easy move. If we arrest Arthur tomorrow, his defense counsel will file for immediate bail claim, an internal family dispute over estate management, and secure a quiet, sealed plea arrangement that keeps his reputation intact among his investors. Your grandmother doesn't want a quiet settlement in a judge's private chambers. She wants a public, undeniable dismantling of the entire facade Arthur has spent 30 years building. Harrison Vance leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished mahogany desk as he laid out the blueprint for my parents' public execution. In exactly 4 weeks, he began, his voice cutting through the quiet office like a scalpel. Arthur and Victoria are hosting the annual Vance Summer Gala at the Seaport Harbour Hotel. It is the premier social event of their calendar, and they have invited over 300 guests. The guest list includes every major institutional investor in Boston, rival hedge fund managers, state senators, and most importantly, the entire Whittemore family. The mention of the Whitmores instantly clarified the grand strategy. The Whitmores were New England royalty, possessing a commercial real estate empire that controlled half of downtown Boston and a multi-billion-dollar family office. Charles had spent the last 8 months courting their youngest daughter, Madeline, fabricating an illusion of financial brilliance to secure a marriage alliance. Arthur and Victoria desperately needed this wedding. It was the ultimate smokescreen to conceal the fact that Arthur's private equity fund was bleeding capital due to his disastrous tech shorts. The gala was designed to project immense, unshakable financial strength, using Charles's faux success to lure the Whittemores into merging their assets with the Vance family fund. That gala, Harrison continued, a cold, predatory smile playing across his lips, is where we spring the trap. If we strike them there in front of the very people they are trying to deceive, Arthur will have no escape route. The Whitmores will pull their capital. The investors will panic, and the entire house of cards will implode in a matter of minutes. But to ensure the blow is fatal, we need more than just a grainy surveillance clip and a public dealership archive. We need the ironclad original paperwork from the sale of the Audubon print. He explained that a high-end art broker like Julian Lowell would never facilitate a near $500,000 cash transaction without a formal purchase agreement and a signed affidavit of clean title. To protect his own gallery from federal money laundering audits, Lowell would have forced Arthur to sign documentation swearing he possessed the legal power of attorney to liquidate the asset on my behalf. "You have exactly 4 weeks, Audrey," Harrison commanded. "You must infiltrate Lowell Galleries, bypass their corporate security, and retrieve those physical documents. We need the exact mechanism of their forgery on paper, ready to be projected onto a screen." I absorbed the immense weight of the assignment, my mind shifting from the principles of structural engineering to the mechanics of corporate espionage. I was being asked to run a covert, high-stakes investigation against my own biological parents while trapped inside a broken body. My pelvic brace felt heavier, and the pins in my shoulder throbbed in the cold air, but I looked my uncle dead in the eye and nodded slowly. "I'll get the documents, Uncle Harrison," I said, my voice hardening. Every single page. Harrison closed the manila folder, his expression returning to its habitual mask of aristocratic detachment. "There is one immediate hurdle you must survive first," he warned me. "You must go home. You must recover in your apartment on Beacon Hill. Arthur and Victoria will visit you. They will hover, they will monitor your recovery, and they will realize you are growing stronger. Most importantly, they will try to force you to close the legal loophole regarding the missing Audubon print before the gala. You must suppress every single natural instinct you have to fight back." He leaned closer, his gaze drilling into mine. "You must play the part of the naive, obedient, broken daughter they have always assumed you are. Swallow their insults, smile through the agony of your injuries, and let them believe they have completely broken your spirit. If you show them even a microscopic fraction of the rage burning inside your chest, Arthur will panic, selling off the Riva yacht and bury the paperwork where we can never find it. I stood up from the leather chair, leaning heavily on my crutches, as a sharp wave of physical pain radiated up my spine. I looked at Harrison and told him they wouldn't suspect a single thing, then walked out into the freezing Boston evening. The vintage gas lamps lining Mount Vernon Street cast long, flickering shadows across the brick facade of my Beacon Hill brownstone when the medical transport dropped me off. I dragged my rigid walking boot across the threshold, my crutches clicking loudly against the hardwood floor of my dark entryway as I pushed the door open. The lights in my living room were already blazing, casting an artificial glow that cut through the shadows of the hallway. Sitting conspicuously on my restored velvet sofa were Arthur and Victoria Vance, looking less like concerned parents visiting an injured child and more like an executive board waiting to terminate an insubordinate employee. "How did you get in here?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, strained, and deliberately weak as I hovered near the kitchen island. Victoria held up a sleek silver keycard with a manicured hand, her expression completely devoid of remorse. "I kept the emergency bypass card you gave us when the brownstone's HVAC system failed last winter, Audrey," she said, her voice dripping with a practiced maternal condescension. "We felt it was our duty to ensure you were settling in properly after making the incredibly reckless decision to discharge yourself from MGH against medical advice." Arthur didn't waste a single moment on parental pleasantries or ask about the heavy orthopedic sling binding my left shoulder. He reached into his breast pocket, extracted a stiff, cream-colored manila folder, and tossed it onto the marble coffee table with a sharp, authoritative thud. He smoothed his silk tie, adopted his corporate negotiation posture, and looked down his nose at me. "We know you've been accessing your apartment's digital security logs from your hospital bed, Audrey," he stated coldly. "So let's dispense with the theatrics. We reallocated the Audubon folio." He didn't use the word stolen. He didn't use the word taken. He used the corporate euphemism reallocated, as if my personal inheritance was merely a line item in a corporate ledger. Victoria leaned forward, her pearls clicking together as she adopted a tone of sanctimonious family sacrifice. "Your brother Charles is on the absolute precipice of securing his entire future, Audrey," she lectured, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The Whitmores are old money, and they expect a certain level of financial pedigree. They expect Charles to arrive at their Newport estate, looking like an executive peer, not a struggling startup founder. The family had to make a temporary strategic sacrifice to ensure his success." I listened in silence as she twisted the narrative, framing the blatant theft of my life's asset as my noble mandatory contribution to my brother's fragile ego. She genuinely expected me to absorb the massive financial devastation and thank her for the privilege of saving Charles from social embarrassment. "Why didn't you just ask me?" I asked, letting my voice tremble slightly, playing into their perception of my weakness. "Why did you wait until I was unconscious on a mountain pass to break into my safe?" Arthur waved his hand dismissively, as if my question were a tedious administrative annoyance. "Because you have always been historically difficult regarding family capital, Audrey," he snapped. "You utterly lack the broader strategic vision required to understand high-level family asset management." He opened the folder on the coffee table and slid a single sheet of heavy bond paper across the glass surface. "This is a simple administrative cleanup. You need to sign it tonight so we can put this unfortunate business behind us." I stepped around the kitchen counter, my crutches scraping against the floor, and looked down at the document. It was a retroactive, backdated bill of sale, explicitly detailing the permanent transfer of ownership of the 1827 Audubon print from Audrey Vance to Arthur Vance for the nominal sum of $1. The date printed at the top was October 24th, exactly 9 days before they actually broke into my safe. They were asking me to sign away a felony, They were demanding that I retroactively grant them legal permission, but for grand larceny. If my pen touched that paper, Harrison's entire legal case would evaporate, and the theft would legally cease to exist. "I can't sign this," I whispered, looking up at my father, letting my expression harden just a fraction to bait his response. "Gamma Eleanor gave that print to me. It's my property." Arthur's corporate demeanor vanished in an instant, his mask of paternal authority slipping to reveal the desperate, volatile tyrant underneath. He stood up, his tall frame looming over me, invading my physical space as he wielded his social power like a blunt weapon. "Listen to me very carefully, Audrey," he hissed, his voice vibrating with sudden rage. "You are currently the lead historical engineer on the old State House restoration project. That multi-million-dollar state contract relies entirely on the final approval of the Boston Historical Commission next month." He stepped closer, his eyes boring into mine. "I am a Tier 1 donor to that commission. I play golf with the state commerce directors, and I sit on the advisory board. If you do not sign that document by the end of this week, I will make one phone call. I will inform the board that your catastrophic physical injuries have rendered you medically unfit to oversee a historic site. I will have your credentials revoked. I will bankrupt your private consultancy, and I will ensure you never restore so much as a brick in New England again." Victoria stood up beside him, her face hardening into a matching mask of elitist cruelty. "If you fight us on this, Audrey, you are no longer a Vance," she warned. "You will be completely cut out of the family trust. You will not be welcome at the summer gala, you will be barred from Charles's wedding, and you will be left entirely alone in this city with a ruined career." They stood side by side, a united front of corporate greed and emotional extortion, completely willing to destroy my entire life's work to cover up their crime. I remembered Uncle Harrison's voice echoing in my mind. Suppress every instinct to fight back. Play the broken daughter. I let my shoulders slump, relaxing my good right arm, so it hung limply at my side, allowing my weight to shift heavily onto my crutches. The sudden physical movement sent a genuine searing wave of agony through my fractured pelvis, and tears of pure physical torment immediately sprang to my eyes. Arthur and Victoria, completely blinded by their own arrogance, misread my physical agony as total emotional defeat. I let my voice break into a pathetic waver. You're backing me into a corner," I choked out, letting a tear spill over my eyelashes. "I'm in so much pain, and I can't think straight right now. Please, just give me a few days to process this. I promise I won't ruin Charles's future. I'll bring the signed document to the family dinner on Sunday." Victoria's posture relaxed instantly, her practiced aristocratic maternal smile returning to her face like a coat of fresh lacquer. She reached out, patting my uninjured arm with sickening tenderness. "I knew you would finally be reasonable, darling," she cooed. "It's always best to do the right thing for the family." Arthur buttoned his tailored suit jacket, giving a curt, triumphal nod of approval. They walked out of my apartment, the heavy mahogany door clicking shut behind them, leaving the silver keycard on the counter. The moment the lock turned, the tears vanished from my face. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers moving with rapid cold efficiency as I took a high-resolution photograph of the backdated bill of sale and routed it directly to Harrison's secure server. They thought they were trapping me with a legal ultimatum. They didn't realize they had just handed me the first physical piece of written evidence proving their intent to commit fraud. I walked over to my desk, my pain forgotten as the adrenaline surged through my veins. They were terrified of the paper trail at Lowell Galleries, which meant the original transaction was sloppy. Tomorrow morning, the hunt for Julian Lowell would begin. The morning air on Newbury Street carried the bitter, sharp sting of a classic New England winter. Frost clung to the edges of the wrought iron railings and the pristine display windows of Back Bay's most exclusive commercial corridor. I sat in the back of an Uber, my eyes fixed on the brick townhouse that housed Lowell Galleries. My left shoulder was anchored tightly within its canvas orthopedic sling, and my pelvic brace sent a dull, throbbing reminder of my accident up my spine with every slight pothole the car hit. But my mind was operating with a clinical, detached focus. I checked my phone. The battery was at 100%, and the high-fidelity voice memo application was already set to record, its digital microphone calibrated to catch every frequency from inside my heavy wool coat pocket. I managed to exit the vehicle with slow, deliberate movements, leaning heavily on my crutches to emphasize my physical vulnerability. The heavy glass door of the gallery was flanked by historical brass plaques, and as I pushed it open, a classic brass chime echoed through the interior. The air inside smelled of expensive beeswax polish, aged parchment, and the distinct, suffocating scent of generational wealth. Display alcoves lined the walls lit by precise halogen spotlights that showcased mid-century abstract masterpieces, European sculptures, and rare archival manuscripts. It was a playground for the ultra-wealthy of Beacon Hill and New York, a place where multi-million-dollar transactions were finalized over glasses of sparkling water and discreet wire transfers. At the back of the long gallery, seated behind a massive minimalist desk carved from solid black walnut, was Julian Lowell. He was a man in his early 60s, immaculately groomed, wearing a tailored tweed blazer, a silk pocket square, and a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses that rested low on the bridge of his nose. He was examining a Dutch landscape painting with a jeweler's loupe, but the moment the chime rang, his eyes flicked upward. His gaze traveled over my orthopedic sling, my rigid walking boot, and my crutches before finally settling on my face. I watched him with the analytical precision of a restoration engineer, tracking a structural crack. The exact millisecond my eyes met his, a microscopic twitch registered at the corner of his left eyelid. His spine stiffened beneath his tailored blazer, and his fingers tightened around the handle of his jeweler's loupe. He recognized my facial structure immediately. He had spent hours examining the Audubon print from my grandmother's collection, and he knew exactly whose features were stamped onto the Vance lineage. "Good morning," he said, his voice a polished baritone purr that carried the practiced warmth of a man who sold luxury items to billionaires. "Welcome to Lowell Galleries. How may I assist you today, miss?" I dragged my walking boot forward, letting the rubber tip scrape loudly against the polished hardwood floor. I hunched my shoulders, pulling my coat tighter around my brace, projecting the absolute image of a fragile, broken woman who was barely holding her life together after a severe trauma. "Mr. Lowell," I said, my voice quiet, trembling slightly and heavy with simulated exhaustion. "My name is Audrey Vance. I'm here because I'm looking for something that belongs to me." Lowell's professional smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned completely cold, the warmth evaporating like mist over Charles River. He carefully set his jeweler's loupe down on the black walnut desk and folded his hands together. "Ah, the Vance family," he murmured, his tone dropping into a guarded, neutral register. "A historic name in Boston. But I am afraid, Miss Vance, that if you are looking for a specific acquisition or inheritance piece, our strict client confidentiality agreements prevent me from discussing inventory histories or private transactions with outside parties. If there is a dispute within your family, I must advise you to handle it directly with your father, Arthur." I dropped my gaze to the floor, letting a long, shaky sigh escape my lips. I played the part of the naive, overwhelmed daughter, perfectly letting my head shake in apparent despair. "I tried to talk to my father, Mr. Lowell," I whispered, stepping closer to the desk until I could see the reflection of my own pale face in the polished wood. "But he won't listen to me. And I don't think you understand the position you've been put in. Lowell raised an eyebrow, a flicker of elitist amusement dancing in his eyes. And what position is that, Miss Vance? We are a licensed, certified international institution. Every transaction we execute is perfectly compliant with traditional trade protocols. I looked up, meeting his eyes with a fearful, wide expression, and leaned heavily against the edge of his desk. My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, retained a senior managing partner at one international place, I said, my voice dropping to an intense, terrifying whisper. His name is Harrison Vance. He is currently finalizing an emergency petition for an injunction to freeze assets with the Massachusetts Superior Court. By the end of this week, Harrison is filing a formal criminal complaint with the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office for Class B felony grand larceny. The name Harrison Vance hit Julian Lowell like a physical concussion. The amusement vanished from his face, and his skin turned a dull, pasty shade of grey. Harrison wasn't just a corporate lawyer. He was a predator in the New England legal community, a man who had dismantled multi-million-dollar art fraud syndicates and revoked the business licenses of 3 different galleries in Back Bay over the last 2 decades. I don't want to cause trouble for your business, Mr. Lowell, I continued, letting my voice shake with artificial terror. But the Economic Police Massachusetts will be arriving here with a search warrant by Monday morning to seize the print and every digital ledger in this building. I just wanted to find the original documentations before the detectives show up and drag your name across the front page of the Boston Globe as a fence for stolen family assets. The silence that blanketed the gallery was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, antique ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Julian Lowell sat frozen behind his black walnut desk, the color completely drained from his cheeks as his brain scrambled to calculate the sheer magnitude of the legal avalanche rushing toward him. His loyalty to Arthur Vance, a one-time seller who had provided a lucrative piece of art, evaporated in a single terrifying second. In the elite art world of Boston, a reputation took 3 generations to build and less than 24 hours to completely destroy. Miss Vance. Lowell stammered, his polished baritone cracking as he cleared his throat nervously, his hands visibly shaking as he pushed his glasses up his nose. Let us not take any drastic, premature steps. I want to state very clearly and for the record that Lowell Galleries conducted this specific acquisition in absolute good faith. Your father, Arthur Vance, presented himself as the sole managing executor of the Vance Family Trust, possessing full discretionary authority over all heirloom assets. He lied to you, Mr. Lowell, I stated, my voice steadying just a fraction to show that I was his only lifeline out of a federal indictment. He possesses 0 ownership rights over that Audubon print. The title belongs exclusively to me under an irrevocable deed of gift signed 7 years ago. If you helped him convert a stolen asset into $450,000 in cash, you are legally an accessory to grand larceny and wire fraud. Lowell stood up so fast his leather chair rolled back into the mahogany wall behind him. I have an establishment to protect Miss Vance, he said, his professional distance completely replaced by frantic urgency. I will not allow my gallery to be dragged into a criminal indictment because of Arthur's financial desperation. He turned around, pulled a heavy brass ring of keys from his blazer pocket, and walked over to a reinforced fireproof filing cabinet disguised behind a silk tapestry. He unlocked the top drawer, flipped through a series of thick manila folders, and extracted a sleek, plastic-bound corporate portfolio. He marched back to the desk and slammed it down, flipping the pages open with trembling fingers until he reached the original transaction receipts. Look at this, Lowell insisted, pointing a shaking finger at the documents speaking directly toward the hidden microphone in my coat pocket. Arthur presented this specific document, a power of attorney and asset disposal authorization form. It features your legal name, your identification parameters, and what he swore was your authentic signature, authorizing him to liquidate Folio 44A to cover your ongoing medical and consultancy expenses. I leaned over the desk, my eyes scanning the heavy bond paper. There it was, the smoking gun. The document was a complete and utter fabrication. The signature at the bottom bore my name, but it was written with a shaky, unnatural stroke that attempted to mimic my handwriting but failed completely under close inspection. It was a blatant, amateurish forgery executed by Arthur Vance on the very afternoon he broke into my safe. He signed my name, I murmured, pulling my phone from my coat pocket and taking high-resolution photographs of every single page in the portfolio, including the gallery's internal wire transfer confirmation. And look at the timestamp on the bank routing numbers, Mr. Lowell. The $450,000 wasn't sent to the Vance family fund. It was routed directly to an offshore shell corporation registered under the name AV Holdings in the Cayman Islands. I noticed the offshore routing, Lowell admitted, his voice dropping to a guilty whisper. But Arthur claimed it was for international tax optimization strategies related to his hedge fund. I had no reason to suspect he was hiding the capital from his own daughter. And he looked at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. The original Audubon print is still here, Miss Vance. It is currently locked in our climate-controlled vault downstairs, awaiting its official delivery to a private collector in New York after the new year. I will flag the asset as disputed immediately. It will not leave this building. You will do more than that, Mr. Lowell, I said, my voice turning as cold and unyielding as the winter ice on Boston Harbor. You will print out a certified stamped copy of this entire transaction portfolio, along with a signed affidavit stating that Arthur Vance presented these forged documents to you under false pretenses. You will deliver those physical copies directly to Harrison Vance's office at 1 International Place by 5 p.m. today. Lowell nodded frantically, turning to his computer terminal to initiate the printing process without a single word of protest. I watched the machine slide the crisp sheets of paper out each page, representing another brick in the prison wall that was closing around my father. I took the certified copies, packed them carefully into my bag, and looked at the terrified broker one last time. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Lowell, I said quietly. You just saved your gallery, but my father is about to lose everything. I turned and walked out into the freezing afternoon, the weight of the evidence in my hand feeling lighter than air. The stage was officially set for the Vance Summer Gala, and the executioner was ready. The heavy glass doors of Lowell Galleries closed behind me with a soft, final thud, cutting off the suffocating scent of expensive beeswax and panic. I stood on the brick sidewalk of Newbury Street, the freezing Boston wind whipping through my coat. But for the first time since my SUV spun out on the black ice of the Mohawk Trail, I didn't feel the biting cold. My right hand was clamped around the handle of my bag, squeezing the crisp certified copies of Arthur's forged power of attorney and the Cayman Islands wire transfer routing slips. I leaned heavily on my crutches, taking a long, slow breath of the crisp winter air. An engineer spends her entire career studying the unseen stresses inside a structure. The microscopic hairline fractures in a foundation, the hidden rot in a support beam, the subtle bowing of a load-bearing wall under too much weight. My father's entire life was a textbook example of structural failure. He had spent 30 years building a grand facade of old money stability and hedge fund brilliance. But underneath the polished exterior, the wood was completely rotted out by greed and desperation. And now I held the exact blueprint of his collapse in my hands. Instead of calling another transport, I navigated the uneven bricks of the Back Bay sidewalks, my walking boot crunching against the thin layer of salt and ice, and made my way toward the public gardens. I needed a moment of absolute stillness before the final phase of Harrison's trap was set into motion. I found an empty iron bench near the frozen lagoon, brushed away a layer of frost with my uninjured hand, and carefully lowered my body onto the seat. Every nerve ending in my fractured pelvis throbbed in protest, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the immense icy satisfaction washing over my mind. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison's direct encrypted line. He answered on the very first vibration. "Tell me you have the ink, Audrey," he said, his voice clipped and efficient. "I have the original signatures, the gallery stamp, and the wire transfer receipts," I replied, staring out at the bare, skeletal branches of the willow trees hanging over the ice. "Arthur didn't just forge my name, Uncle Harrison. He routed the entire $450,000 payment out of the country within 20 minutes of the sale. It went straight into a Cayman shell account called AV Holdings." I could hear the distinct sound of Harrison's gold fountain pen scratching against a legal pad on the other end of the line. "A classic asset-hiding maneuver," Harrison murmured, his tone dropping into a dangerous analytical register. "He's trying to keep the liquid cash completely invisible from his primary fund's quarterly audit. He needs that money entirely liquid and unleveraged so he can deposit it into Charles's account right before the Whittemores execute their due diligence review next week." He paused, and I could hear the cold satisfaction in his breath. Julian Lowell's courier just arrived at my reception desk with the certified affidavit. "You did well, Audrey. You broke him faster than I anticipated." "What's the next move?" I asked, my grip tightening on my phone. "My parents expect me to bring the signed, backdated bill of sale to the family dinner this Sunday. If I don't show up with that paper, Arthur will realize I'm stalling. He'll look at his golf buddy connections on the Historical Commission and try to yank my restoration credentials before Monday morning." "You are going to that dinner, Audrey?" Harrison commanded, his voice dropping into a register that sounded like a general directing a bloodless coup. "And you are going to give him exactly what he wants. You will hand him a signed document." I froze my breath, catching in my throat as a wave of confusion hit me. "Harrison, if I sign a bill of sale, the felony disappears. The transaction becomes legally authorized retroactively. We lose our leverage. You aren't signing a standard bill of sale," Harrison clarified, a dark, low chuckle vibrating through the receiver. "My senior corporate litigators spent the morning drafting a very specific, highly specialized legal instrument. It looks identical to the standard Massachusetts property release form Arthur handed you. The formatting, the font, the statutory headers, they are indistinguishable to the naked eye. But embedded deep within the boilerplate indemnification clauses on page 2 is a comprehensive binding cognate note and an absolute unconditional confession of asset conversion." I blinked, my engineering brain instantly translating the legal terminology. A confession. A cognate clause is an ancient, incredibly lethal legal mechanism, Harrison explained, his tone radiating supreme professional malice. The moment Arthur signs his name to accept that document, he is legally agreeing that he has converted your personal property without authorization, that the signature on the Lowell Gallery's ledger was an unauthorized facsimile, and that he waives any and all rights to a trial, a defense, or an appeal. He will literally be signing a binding legal confession of his own felony, wrapped inside what he thinks is his total victory over you. He won't read page 2. He is too arrogant, too desperate, and too blinded by his own perceived dominance to check the fine print of a document he thinks he forced you to sign. The sheer brilliance of the trap made me smile against the freezing wind. Arthur believed he was the apex predator of the Boston financial scene, a man who could bully his injured daughter into submission with professional extortion. He had no idea he was stepping onto a structural platform that had already been rigged with demolition charges. "Bring the folder to my office tomorrow morning at dawn to swap the pages," Harrison said. "Then play the victim one last time on Sunday. Let him gloat. Let him think he has completely broken your spirit and secured Charles's future. The more confident he feels over the weekend, the less likely he is to check his perimeter before the Seaport Harbor Hotel gala." "And Charles's boat?" I asked. "The Riva Mare. My maritime law specialists are already coordinating with the United States Coast Guard and the Port Authority of Boston," Harrison replied coldly. "The moment the confession is executed on Sunday, a temporary maritime lien will be placed against the hull registration number of that watercraft for suspected asset conversion. Charles won't even be able to legally untie the mooring lines at the Boston Yacht Haven without triggering an electronic alert to the port warden. We are boxing them in block by block. Enjoy your weekend, Audrey. On Sunday night, we hand them the pen." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my eyes tracking a pair of winter birds fighting over a scattering of breadcrumbs on the frozen lagoon. The Vance family dynamic had always been about survival of the most ruthless a toxic environment, where affection was measured in portfolio returns and loyalty was a currency to be traded away for social standing. For 27 years, I had quietly endured their dismissal, working 60-hour weeks in dusty archival vaults and freezing construction zones to build a life independent of their corrupt circle. They thought my love for history made me soft. They thought my passion for preservation meant I didn't know how to fight. I stood up from the bench, my pelvic brace clicking sharply in the quiet afternoon air, and adjusted my sling. I tucked the folder securely under my arm and walked back toward the street to hail a cab. The weekend was passing, the winter shadows were lengthening over Beacon Hill, and the countdown to the Vance family dinner had officially begun.